My advice to folks is come in and listen and learn.
Mhm.
What I find leaders do is like there is this innate need to like come in and make impact day one. And so they start driving change and start doing things and hiring people and firing people. And it's like, it's so super disruptive. And at that stage, you don't know enough to know if the changes and the recommendations you're making are the right ones. So if you're coming into an organization, the best advice I can give, and only because I've done the opposite many times and have failed miserably, come in and really do your best to listen, pay attention, engage people, learn as much about the business, your customers, your product, so that way you can make informed decisions that are going to make meaningful, long-lasting impact. Now obviously you can't just sit around for 100 days, or else then you definitely probably won't be making an impact and you might not make it to the next 100. So come in, I would say, listen, your first couple of weeks should all about listening and learning. Then start to find some low hanging fruit, right? Because as a leader, you do want to make some meaningful impact. But again, at that stage, to impact lagging indicators like retention or churn or revenue growth and these things, that takes time, right? To really make meaningful changes there. So find small wins and opportunities to drive change. It could be in process, it could be in people, could be enhancing technology. But as you start to listen and learn, you're going to uncover these small wins. Make some changes there. That's going to help you get trust from your peers, from your team, get that buy-in. And once you start to build that internal credibility, you're going to be able to make more meaningful impact in the next part of that 100 days, right? So if we're breaking it into 30, 30, 40, 30, listen, learn, make some quick, small wins, low hanging fruit, and then really start to build some alliances around bigger strategic initiatives and that planning phase. And I think that that's really the big part of the back half of that 100 is starting to plan strategically. As leaders, sometimes we find ourselves working in the business, not on the business. But you've got to be able to elevate yourself and work on the business. And that's where that strategy comes in. So your first, 60 days or so, you should have enough understanding about what's going on to figure out what is the direction we need to go to hit the milestones that we need to as a team.
That makes total.
It's a pretty simple answer. It's 2 syllables. It's listen.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you should go on a listening tour. And you should really understand, how the business is run, understand the pain points that people are already feeling and know that they're feeling, and even may have a solution that they haven't been able to enact in the past. And then once you've listened to everyone and you've had the opportunity to gain that information, then bring in your own thought leadership, your own expertise, your own frameworks, however you traditionally run your business. Mesh those together in a meaningful way where it feels like that it's being co-created between your own self as the leader and then the rest of the team who gave you this super valuable information. And in doing that, you'll no doubt hear from either customers directly or customers via feedback via your team. And I think if you have that cohesive 360 view of leadership, team, and customer, and you really understand the data and the information, that'll help you think through the strategy, the framework of how to move the needle to what everybody wants, I think, is to keep customers happy so they keep coming back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stickiness, retention. That's what I would probably do in my first 100 days. And that's what I've done in my last 4 jobs in my first 100 days is the same exact thing.
So if you come into an organization or you're building a CX function within an existing an organization where you're already working, I think for that first 100-day sprint, I think I would focus in on 3 things really. One, I would focus in on identifying what data do you have in your organization overall. Trying to identify all the different data sources. The larger organization it is, the more complicated this can be. With it at Cisco, when we started this process, it took us 3 years to find all of the data sources and get access to all the data sources.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge company, so there's a lot of the major sources we knew, but then there are little pockets of things that are valuable. But when you're trying to build an overall connected customer experience, you've got to have all the data sources. And so number one, I would identify the data sources that you have available and get access to them and start to bring those into a data lake so that you can start to orchestrate across all the different data sources. Number two, I would start, if you don't already, I would start to really put together a program to understand who are your customers and what sort of personas can you develop based on your customer base. So in the first 100 days, this would mean talking to your frontline folks within your company, salespeople, marketing people, support people. I would put together a customer advisory board, and I have two different types. I would have a sort of a more senior business focused group of executives and maybe meet once a quarter, once every 6 months. And I would have a group of users if that doesn't already exist in your company, right? So get the folks who are actually using what you're selling, the product or the service that you're selling, and speak with them more frequently so that you can really start to understand how they operate, what their needs are, and what their friction points are. So like data and customer information, those are the first two things I'd start off in the first 100 days.
For the first 100 days, I would say get in front of your customers as much as possible. Like, I mean, get on the road, go and meet your customers, learn about their businesses, become comfortable representing your customers in-house, right, inside your company. It's certainly a role that, I mean, there's a lot of operational components to this role, but at the same time, you are, a bit of a spokesperson on behalf of your customers, especially your big customers. There are a lot of moments where internally, right, you have to advocate for certain customers or advocate for a particular, product development or whatever the situation is, and arming yourself with a ton of really, kind of tangible evidence about and an understanding of your customer base goes really far. It helps, helps navigate through kind of what could be some internal challenging moments. So in the first 100 days, that's what I would say is kind of core. Get your footing with your customer base. The other thing I would say is, in my opinion, it's a very dependent role, right? Like, I have dependencies on product, I have dependencies on finance, I have dependencies on legal, I have dependencies on sales, right? Like, everything kind of comes to a head under customer success. And so those are kind of partnerships that I'm looking to solidify and kind of ingrain myself in procedurally, and looking for ways to contribute from input from the customer base into those processes. So that can also, I think, be something that's navigated in the first 100 days.
It's interesting. It depends, I think, on the role that you're in, but regardless of that, the most important thing you can do is listen. I had the pleasure of for my master's program, I got to actually speak with Jack Welch, and there was a question that was asked from the panel, of, hey, I'm going into this new company, this new role, what do I need to do in my first 90 days? And Jack Welch said, shut up and listen, right? And then that's my advice is you've got to listen. Whatever ideas you may have, they don't matter if they don't work for that business or for that function or for your customers, most importantly. So there is that listening component. So, for example, new in the role here at Veritiv, I've been on what I consider a listening tour for the last 120 days, and it's incredibly informative to just listen. Beyond that, you need to start to collect data, whatever it may be in whatever form it is. You need to understand what are the metrics that you're using. How does the business measure productivity and performance and customer satisfaction today? Don't start with the solution. You've really got to slow down, look at what exists, because you might have some gems there, right? There may be some phenomenal data that already exists before you try to bring some other fancy new thing into the mix and just further complicate it. So first 100 days, listen, and really start to collect that information on how the business is running today.
That's great.
Well, number one, you have to understand the company you're working for. You have to understand their ideals. You have to understand what their goals are. Secondly, you have to respect the people who work at the firm who've been there longer than you. And that was one of the first things I said I still remember my first meeting with people at Amplifi was, look, this is my first day on the job or first week on the job. I have less experience than every single person I'm speaking to right now. Now we're going to grow this, so hopefully that changes very quickly. And it did as we added more people, but I need to rely on you guys to help me out. understanding that people have been there longer than you. They know the ins and outs. And the example I always give is people talk about the CEO runs the company. And in a sense, the CEO does run the company. But at the largest organizations, you know who's really running the company is the executive assistant. They really have their finger more on the pulse of the business than the CEO. He's the leader, the CEO oversees things, but the executive assistant is the one that is really running the companies, because that person's going into the nuts and bolts and such. So really getting in the first 90 to 100 days and saying what makes us tick, how do we do things, how can we improve things, and how can we improve everybody else in the process.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think it all starts with understanding who do you want to be. You can't be everything to everybody. And some of not only my most fun and memorable interactions are the ones where you really sit down with a group, and ideally it's all leaders and saying, what do you want your customer experience to look like? And not everybody always agrees. Sometimes the chief financial officer has a different view than the CEO. But those are great conversations to have. What's so fun is a lot of times people have a better idea understanding what they don't want it to look like. And I a lot of times like to come up with always and nevers. What are the things that you always want to make sure happen with your customer experience, and what are the things that can never happen? Because if you just, start with a blank piece of paper, it's like you're boiling the ocean. And really taking time to, kind of can start with those always and nevers. And then the next thing is really the pillars that we've come up with is you need to have processes that support your team and support your customer. And the better the better experience your agents or your team members have, the better experience your customers will have with customer experience. So we look at two things. We look at workflow and workforce, and what things are work with your workflow and make it easy for customers and limit that maybe friction for customers, and what are the things that can be improved. And then the same thing with your workforce. What are the tools your workforce has that really allow them to provide that world-class customer care, and what are some things that need to be added?
Oh, it's such a good question. It's such a common question. My approach to customer experience and to change is people-centered. So I would say the most important thing is to balance that desire to make an impression, that desire to kind of like make your name, with the need to acknowledge and support colleagues and your team. So I would say there are two number one priorities to do. One of those is to get to know stakeholders, actually understand their goals and perspectives, what gets them out of bed in the morning, understand what they're already doing in respect to customer experience management, and understand how they feel about any changes that you might want to make in their capabilities. I think it's really important to remember that customer experience doesn't matter customer experience or customer experience management. Excuse me. I think the second of the two, very important, is actually understand what is happening in the business, understand what works well, and understand where there are gaps and barriers to robust customer experience management. With those two things, you're going to have people by your side and a bit of a gap. You can start then building a strategy with your stakeholders, and then in parallel, I'd grab something to do, something that's going to make an impact on the business, something that's going to make your stakeholders smile. So think about the levers of growth, what's important in the business and where the opportunities lie. You might want to reduce calls to customer support, or you might want to increase retention. And then see a project through from the beginning to the end. And by the end, I mean realizing benefits and shouting about them from the rooftops. Acknowledge the people you've worked with to make this happen, and really point to customer experience management as a way of ensuring the ongoing sustainable growth of the business.
Oh gosh, I think the first 3 months are critical for any new leader understanding their organization. There are so many things you need to know. You need to know your people. You need to know what they like, what motivates them. How do you get them to rally around your customers? But you really also need to understand your customers as well. So for me, the first 3 months were centered around learning the customer journey, discovering every angle, every interaction, understanding where we have gaps and where we make it really difficult for our customers to work with us. We want to make sure our customers have a seamless experience, right? You want to make it easy for them to make business. You don't even need to have a face, a name. You need to make sure they have what they need on a click of a button. So for me, exploring the full customer journey and mapping it out, documenting it, and making sure everybody in the company understands that and know the role they play was the key activity I recommend anyone in the first 3 months to run with.
I would say the first 100 days in a company is to really spend time with different departments to understand what do they do and really follow the path along the customer journey. So awareness, interest, typically your marketing team. Spend time with them, understand how they're speaking to the customer, what's working, where are they showing up. Really dig deep into the awareness stage, the early on in the customer journey. And then go talk to the next team, which is how customers would, once they made their decision to buy. Is it e-commerce? Is there an e-commerce team, a web team, a sales team? All these different areas of where people can buy, go dig into and actually go through the process, walk in the shoes of the customer. And then so on, learn, buy, get, use, pay. Oh boy, pay is a huge part of the customer journey. And get help, obviously, customer service. Can't skip that part. So that's my advice, is really walk in the customer's shoes from the inside and then spend time with customers too.
Yeah, great question. And it's something that I see so many times with folks that I work with and executives. They're saying, gosh, where do I start? Because in some ways you can say it can be overwhelming and exciting and also exhilarating all at the same time.
Absolutely.
So I think it absolutely is getting clarity around a couple of things. One is building a vision and a charter for what yourself and or if you have a team and your role in the company. Assuming it's a first-time customer experience team, or even if it's not, it's really important to define kind of what you do and how you're going to work with the organization. So I think that's one area, is building that charter, that team structure, and an engagement model with the organization. I think the other thing is to understand where the organization is in their CX efforts. Whether or not there's been a CX team, chances are there have been a lot of things and initiatives and projects and products that have been developed around the customer. So I'm one of those big believers in not starting from scratch, but rather understanding where you are in your CX maturity and using the things that have worked and building on those successes, as well as then seeing where you have gaps to fill in kind of that roadmap and that kind of that first 100 days of where you want to see yourselves, your team, and the CX work going forward.
Yeah, it seems like a great way to get settled, understand everything, and make sure everybody's on the same page, right? You're not going to start a bunch of new initiatives when you have a lot of the data there already. You just go through it.
And the third thing I would say is really important is understanding the voice of your stakeholders and the voice of your customers and the voice of all your employees. And so I'm a big believer in those first 100 days, always, but really in those first 100 days of listening, understanding where you have customer feedback, but also like where are the pain points in the organization? Because I think that helps set up where you're going to build your strategy and your focus areas going forward.
Sure. So I think there's this belief that you have to deliver very quickly. And what I've learned through the years is the most important thing you do initially is to learn about your company, learn about your team, learn about your stakeholders, learn about the clients, learn your technology, understand what the business is about and where there are opportunities to expand it, but more just understand what are the problems that you're trying to solve for the company. It's also important very early on to make sure that what was in the job description and what the expectations for the role are aligned with what they actually are. Because a lot of times, having written job descriptions myself, is you write down like 10 or 12 things when actually there's 1 or 2 very clear things. So understand what that is and make sure you're aligned across the board. The other thing that's really, really important is try to find something that is relevant to the company, a problem at the company, but something that is doable and achievable win early on. So it doesn't have to be this huge thing, but in the first 100 days, you should be able to figure out from the conversations, from talking to customers, what isn't working or what might be better, figure it out and do it, because then you have an early win. And it makes it easier to develop the relationships with your stakeholders, and you start off on a good foot versus not so good and have to constantly climb up and prove yourself.
Yeah, so one of the first things I did, this company that I worked for, Pathmatics, which got acquired by Sensor Tower, was a 60-person company, probably about $20 million in revenue with about 6 CSMs. So I came in, they had told me that there was a lot of people management issues. So I knew that that's what I was going into, and that, there was not a lot of certain very, what I would consider essential things that you would do with a customer, like a business review. Mm-hmm. They weren't being done, and none of our CSMs were being held accountable. So I came in and I just observed. I spent solid, I wish I observed more, but in those 100 days, I would say the first 90 days, I tried to listen and observe more than anything else before I decided to make any kind of organizational changes, hiring needs, determining what the hiring needs are, where there were gaps with the department.
Sure. So I think there's a few different things that both I did and what I'd recommend to others, because you always learn by doing. And so after the fact, I'm sure there's things I could have done differently. But what I've found to be most important is first and foremost understanding who your customers are and what their needs are, and really if it's a product that they've been using for a while, are they happy? Are they happy with the solution? Are they happy with the product? And what sort of gaps might they have in that experience? But the other part that I think is really critical, and one of the reasons why I really enjoy being in customer success, is every single role across the organization has an impact on the customer, and every single function across the organization has an impact on the customer. And so really getting to know your peers and understanding what their priorities are, what motivates them, is really critical, because at the end of the day, if you are the one responsible for the customer's overall satisfaction and happiness, you need to understand how the decisions around you are being made, and how you can help to partner with your peers to ultimately improve the full customer experience.
Yeah, that's a fun and also a really challenging question. But I think for me, just I've been able to be in a couple of companies, having to come in, and you've got your first 100 days to get your strategy going, and what are you going to do, and how are you going to turn things around. I think for me, I kind of gravitate towards, I have some I guess frameworks that I like to lean on. I'm a big fan of what Adrian's doing over at CXC with his 4 pillars of the way that you could look at running your business. So I would say, the first 30 days is really just be a sponge, look at what you have. I love to hopefully the organization you're in has been trying to do something with their data. Look at their surveys, look at the feedback. Most people have an NPS program, or gather the feedback, talk to the frontline teams who are actually, dealing with your customers every single day. Try to gather that information to get your insights on what is actually happening. Hopefully there's maybe some process playbooks that you can look at. I always try to carve things down to the moments that matter, because there are some key things that if you can just do those things right, you can either kickstart a program or turn it around. So it's, making sure that you're setting the right expectations in your sales process, looking at that sales to CS handover What time do you get your CS people into meeting with the customer? Are the expectations you're setting something you can achieve? Time to value in the first, whatever that onboarding time to value piece is, like that is typically, and I think all the research shows, if you nail the onboarding, even if everything else is a junk show, your likelihood of getting a renewal is like 70% higher than if you fail at the onboarding. So getting that moment of that value of maybe we made the right decision to go with your team, your service, your product, whatever it is. And then making sure that you look at what are those touch points and activities that helps tell a value story at every moment. Because as soon as you win that business, your whole team should be focused on how do we renew that business? And everything you do should be driving value, referrals, happiness. We can't. Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of how I look at it, is breaking those moments down, and then realize that this is a marathon. You're not going to hit home runs day after your first 100 days. But I think for any, CX leader, having that plan, having an understanding of just like, let's pick 3 things to focus on. I love my 90-day cycles. My team hates me for it, but we plan on 90-day cycles, and really focusing on what is one thing that you're going to deliver in 90 days that's going to improve thinking about the team, the customer, the product, and the brand experience, and do that one thing. And if you, sometimes it's really hard because I'm a guy that I got my notebook here and I've got 57 things that I've got, down, and I'm my worst own, nightmare when it comes to like, man, we should do this, we should fix that. And now, especially being at the CEO level, it's from marketing all the way through to the invoice that goes out. Like I've got ideas, but and I have to keep my team focused on, and I'm a big fan of marginal gain. So if we each just do one thing and you can move the company forward 1%, that's a huge across a horizontal focus CX experience program. So be a sponge, figure out what data you have, figure out the process or the moments that you can drive change with, and then get your 90-day plan going. That would be my recommendation.
I love how